Hello, I'm Dr. Tara Mathieu of shrinkformen.com. If you have a question or would like to schedule a session with me, you can reach me at shrinkformen@gmail.com. This video is part 2 in the Brainwashing Techniques series. The first video is titled Love Bombing, Brainwashing, Trauma Bonds, Narcissists and Borderlines, Part 1. And as I said, this is part 2. So let's get into it. In part 1 of this series, I examined brainwashing techniques used by cults, POW camps, political movements, and manipulative personalities such as narcissists, borderlines, histrionics, and psychopaths. I also explore where and how the brainwashing tactics differ and diverge between cults and abusive individuals in interpersonal relationships. Specifically, cults break down a member's identity and belief system, then rebuild the member's identity in accordance with the cult's belief system or ideology. Once an individual forgoes their former identity, relationships, and life, the abuse stops and salvation is reached. For as long as the individual adheres to and acts in accordance with the cult ideology, that is. In cult-like intimate relationships, there is also a dismantling and loss of identity. This occurs during the devaluation stage of the relationship, which follows the idealization or love bombing stage. Both the love bombing and devaluation are usually more gradual and less obvious than cult recruitment. There are similarities, though. Similar traits of cult victims and narcissistic borderline abuse victims include breaking down your identity. Cults have recruiters and members who love bomb and welcome new victims by offering a sense of belonging. Individual narcissists and borderlines also often have advocates who perform similar functions. They're sometimes referred to as flying monkeys, cheerleaders, and minions. Well, that's how I refer to them. A more technical term would be negative advocates. They tell you what great people Bob the borderline or Nancy the narcissist are, how horrible their exes were, and how special you must be. Occasionally, a family member of the NPD or BPD will warn a client, as in, I hope you know what you're getting into, or wow, you must be a really patient person. But most of the time, the people who are warned about these personalities typically disregard the warning. In an intimate relationship with these individuals, there is not a path to salvation. Narcissists and borderlines continue to break you down or devalue you until one of you dies or the relationship ends. They don't rebuild your identity, nor do they have an ideology behind. It's all about me, my wants, needs, and feelings, and I'm always right, you're always wrong. Make it up to me, you owe me. Then they either discard you or justify their infidelities and other triangles because of your brokenness. Never mind the very large role they played in breaking you. Another similarity between cults and individual abusive relationships are the exploitation of emotional and psychological vulnerabilities of the target. Bullies, con artists, and other predators like easy targets. They go after people who are kind, generous, trusting, eager to please, conscientious, competent, talented, and or gifted, and most importantly, people who have a desire to cooperate and find compromise. You can find that research in the link in the article by Nami, 2003. I believe it was her work on bullying and mobbing in the workplace. I personally refer to these qualities as the 3 N's: nice, naive, and non-confrontational. And many of my clients that I've worked with over the years are a combination of nice, naive, and non-confrontational. Cults and individual narcissists also target the emotionally and or psychologically vulnerable. Many clients have become involved with their abusive partners or exes during or shortly after a stressful life event. For example, divorce, death of a loved one, prolonged illness, changing jobs, changing careers, starting a school program, moving to a new city, etc. If you're interested in a more comprehensive list of stressors, there's I think it's called the Big Life Stress Index. There are 100 of them in ranked order. You can Google it. During periods of heightened stress, some people are more susceptible to an individual or a group claiming to have all the answers and or that offers instant companionship or instant intimacy. This is especially true if a person has historically felt a lack of connection, otherness, or not fitting in, and familial and or social unworthiness and rejection. In other words, they go after people who are hungry for love and a sense of belonging and human connection, and then they exploit the hell out of it. Dr. Michael Langone identified 5 common traits of cult victims that, in my clinical experience, are similar to people who are targeted by all emotional predators. They include 1, a dependent nature, and that is an intense desire for a sense of belonging, approval, acceptance, and a fear of being alone. Sound familiar to anyone watching this? Anyone? Yeah. 2, unassertive, non-confrontational, people pleasers who are reluctant to question authority. 3, gullible, a willingness to believe what another person says without critically thinking it through or challenging it. As an anecdote, over the years with clients I've worked with, when they're going in the initial sessions, going through the history of the relationship, and they're sharing what the ex or current, if they haven't ended the relationship yet, the stories that they were told in the beginning. And I'm like, well, did you not follow up on this? Did that make sense to you when they said that, particularly for women, for some reason, their ex-husband was able to get a restraining order from them and against them, and they can't see their children, which is very unusual for a man to get in the case of an ex-wife and a mother. And they will have believed the most fantastical explanations, or they just don't even ask. It's like the critical thinking gets clicked off. 4, naive idealism. The belief that everyone is good, has some redeeming quality, or can change for the better, despite all evidence to the contrary. Said it before, I'll say it again. You will never change a rattlesnake into a golden retriever, okay? That doesn't happen except in the movies. And even then, those movies are usually under the fantasy genre, okay? 5, a desire for spiritual meaning. And that is to say, the belief in fate, that life has a higher purpose, or everything happens for a reason. Yeah, and the reason might be that you need to learn that there are cruel, horrible people on the planet, and you need to watch out for them, not try to make them better. Look, as I said, there are bad people in the world, and the only meaning or fate involved is your repetition compulsion of childhood and adolescent family of origin trauma. Some people are just exploitative, abusive jerks. Shotzi agrees. And there's no deeper meaning attached to it, but good targets keep searching for it. Now I want to talk about the necessary conditions for brainwashing and grooming by narcissists. The personality traits identified by Dr. Langone and a state of heightened stress are not sufficient to brainwash or groom a potential victim. A conscious or instinctual knowledge of mind control techniques is also necessary. Dr. Margaret Singer identified 6 conditions necessary for brainwashing, or what is also called thought reform. Many cult leaders study these principles and know exactly what they're doing. I doubt my clients' partners and exes have studied these techniques, but rather operate on a combination of instinct and dysfunctional interpersonal relating learned in their own families of origin and through a system of trial and error. On the other hand, the high-functioning ones often know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. If someone is consciously and purposely engaging in these behaviors with premeditation, you should regard them as dangerous because it's highly likely they are full-blown psychopaths. So let's look at Dr. Singer's list. 1, keep the person unaware of what is going on and how he is being changed one step at a time. Many abuse victims liken the process of going from love bombing to devaluation to being a frog in a pot of cool water that gradually heats to a roiling boil. You don't realize it as it's happening. You only start to notice it when it becomes so painful that you either stay in and are boiled to death or leap out. Oh, bloody hell. Stop it. 2, control the person's social and or physical. You missed them, didn't you? Lucy! 2, control the person's social and or physical environment. Sitting on her toy again. 2, control the person's social and or physical environment, especially control the person's time. Abusive personalities commonly isolate their victims from friends and family, and they will often try to completely monopolize your time if you let them. And that includes your time at work, and they will often do that through texting. They don't want you talking to outsiders who might challenge the reality they distort or a challenge to their control or ownership of you. They also want your thoughts, your focus on them at all times. It's sort of like you forget that anything else exists but them and how to please them and keep them happy and keep them from blowing up. 3, systematically create a sense of powerlessness in the person. Clients will often develop a sense of learned helplessness in these relationships. And this occurs when you are repeatedly placed into no-win situations. And then once the learned helplessness develops, then sets in the despair and depression. It's really quite pernicious. 4, manipulate a system of rewards and punishments in order to inhibit the person's natural personality and behavior. Abusive, exploitative relationships often have a strong trauma bond that keeps a victim stuck. Trauma bonds are difficult to break because abusers are intermittently kind and loving in between the cycles of overt abuse. 5, manipulate a system of rewards and punishments in order to promote the group's ideology or belief system and group-approved behaviors. In other words, the narcissist or borderline is right. They're always right. Don't question them. Don't challenge them. The dear leader comes first. You live to serve. In intimate relationships, as opposed to cults, the reward is a ceasefire in conflict or a short period in which the abusive behaviors are absent. In other words, infrequent moments of normalcy. And this is what clients, when I ask them, well, what is so great about this person? And then they go on to describe these magical moments where basically the spouse who's often raging, tantruming, putting them into the no-win situations, gaslighting them, projecting, you know the drill, will just behave like, a regular person. And you have a nice lunch and walk through the park. And so it's not like it's so magical and great. It's just these little moments of normalcy or pockets of normalcy are really just moments where there is an absence of abuse and mind twisting. And that's not the word I usually use, but we'd like to get this monetized. Okay, back to the list. Number 6, put forth a closed system of logic. And Google Calendar just commandeered. Okay, number 6, put forth a closed system of logic and an authoritarian structure that permits no feedback and refuses to be modified except by leadership approval or executive order. This means The group has a top-down pyramid structure. And guess what? The person at the top does not take turns or share power. To quote Dr. Singer, the leader must have verbal ways of never losing. And there's a link to the original source in the printed version of the article, which you can find the link to below the little video rectangle. And if you want a even deeper exploration of that and the verbal ways of never losing power engaged in by narcissistic and borderline personalities and other characterologically disturbed individuals, start watching or reading my Narcissist Fight Club series. Now, these individuals can be mental and verbal contortionists and escape artists. They're able to twist the most obvious set of facts into a Gordian knot and find ways to evade the conversation by changing the subject, also known as derailing and tangenting, or attacking you on a new front. Now let's discuss the similarities between courtship behavior and cult recruitment techniques engaged in these types of toxic relationships. Cults and abusers create feelings of guilt, covert and overt fear, powerlessness, and dependency in their victims in several ways. Manipulation, deception, and love bombing are how cult recruiters and emotional predators get their foot in the door. They lure you in by misrepresenting themselves, lying, hiding their abusive nature, and drugging you with praise and affection. And they just seem so exciting. They're such exciting people, so intense. Once they insinuate themselves into your life and you have become dependent on them to feel good about yourself, the overt abuse ensues. First, let's look at their seduction and relationship building tactics. 1, manipulation and deception. Both cult recruiters and emotional predators employ manipulation and deception to ensnare their targets. Initially, they hide their true natures and intentions and wear a carefully crafted, too good to be true persona. Quoting Leighton here, recruiters identify the specific needs or desires of their targets and play to them. They learn to pick up on a person's fears and vulnerabilities and portray themselves accordingly. Many histrionics, narcissists, psychopaths, and borderlines are natural-born actors and shapeshifters. They intuitively discern what you want, for example, a sexy, sweet, adventurous, sporty, artsy, whatever, woman or man, and then play it and you to the hilt. And if they're not observing it intuitively, then they're asking you explicitly and studying you to find out exactly what you want. And then they give it to you for a time. For a time. They misrepresent themselves to potential partners. And sometimes they're impossible to detect until you're in over your head. Furthermore, most abusers aren't abusive all the time. If they were nasty the majority of the time, most sane people would keep their distance. And this forges a powerful betrayal or trauma bond. Okay, this alternating of nice and nasty. It's difficult for some clients to let go of the fantasy woman or man they fell in love with. The reality is the person who love bombed you simply doesn't exist. They were always the person who's cruel, selfish, pathologically dishonest, immature, unstable, self-absorbed, one-sided, yada, yada, yada. 2, the love bomb. Cult recruiters and many emotional predators will drug you with love, admiration, validation, affection, adoration, flattery, laser beam attention, responsiveness, and sexual and non-sexual touching. They hang on your every word and create a sense of instant rapport, connection, and intimacy. Margaret Singer describes the technique as follows, and I quote, "As soon as any interest is shown by recruits, they may be love bombed by the recruiter or other cult members. This process of feigning friendship and interest in the recruit was part of their program for luring people in. Love bombing is a coordinated effort usually under the direction of leadership that involves long-term members flooding recruits and newer members with flattery, verbal seduction, affection, but usually non-sexual touching, and lots of attention to their every remark. Love bombing, or the offer of instant companionship, is a deceptive ploy accounting for many successful recruitment drives. Many people have been seduced by this kind of behavior. Just about everyone at some point wants to feel special. Successful predators play to your ego needs and then turn the tables on you, which is why it can be so difficult to break away once the devaluation and abuse begins. Again, you're longing for the narcissist or borderline or whatever the person's problem is to return to the kind, loving person they seem to be, who they pretended to be when you first met them. You convince yourself that that's the real person, and the abusive, hostile, controlling, self-absorbed, hypocritical, dishonest, confrontational, passive-aggressive, uncompassionate jerk is the aberration. In reality, the opposite is true. This is how emotional predators and cults seduce. They flatter you and make you feel special at first. Once you're hooked on the flattery and attention, the confusion and pain begin. In part 3, I'll explore how cults and emotional predators break you down and keep you down. Meanwhile, my advice is don't drink the Kool-Aid. Again, I'm Dr. Tara Palmatier of shrinkformen.com. If you have a question or would like to schedule a session with me, you can reach me at shrinkformen@gmail.com. Thank you for watching and have a good day.